High Counselor Zex 427 stared through the crystalline windows of the great chamber, his four eyes blinking in rapid succession. The massive room, usually a picture of order and harmony, had descended into chaos. 247 species represented in the Galactic Council, and for the first time in 50,000 years, none of them knew what to do. It had started as a routine integration procedure. Humans, the newest species to achieve faster-than-light travel, were supposed to follow the same steps every other civilization had followed before them. The rules were simple: accept council authority, follow established trade routes, and implement standardized technology protocols. Impossible, shouted Representative Kral of the Zentari Federation, his scales changing from blue to bright red. No species has ever simply walked away from an integration meeting. But that's exactly what Sarah Chen, Earth's ambassador, had done. She had listened to the Council's demands, smiled politely, and then laughed. Not a mocking laugh, but a genuine one, as if someone had told her a particularly good joke. Then she had stood up, thanked them for their time, and left the chamber. Perhaps there was a translation error, suggested the Moravian delegate, her crystalline form shimmering with concern. High Counselor Zex 427 shook his head. The translation matrix is perfect. It has served us for thousands of years. No, they understood perfectly. They simply chose not to comply. The screens around the chamber showed the current crisis. Human ships appeared everywhere, jumping through council space without proper permits. Their vessels ignored standard travel lanes, instead plotting courses that the council's navigation computers insisted were inefficient. Yet somehow, the humans arrived at their destinations faster. "Look at this," exclaimed Administrator Yacht, pointing to a new report. A human colony has appeared in Sector 7, completely outside approved expansion zones. They didn't even file paperwork. The chamber erupted again. Sector 7 had been marked for development in another 300 years, after proper environmental studies were completed. The humans had simply arrived, found a suitable planet, and started building. "We must send the enforcement fleet," declared Representative Kral. "Show them the proper way of doing things." The enforcement fleet had already tried. The massive ships, painted in the Council's official colors of silver and gold, had positioned themselves around human vessels. They had transmitted the standard warnings, threatening fines and sanctions. The humans had responded by inviting the enforcement crews to something called a space barbecue. "This is unprecedented," muttered Zex 427, looking at the latest reports. Human ships were offering help to anyone who needed it, ignoring the Council's careful regulations about technological exchange. They shared innovations freely, taught others how to modify their ships, and worst of all, they made it look easy. The Council's enforcement officers reported feeling confused. They would approach a human ship to issue a citation, only to end up discussing engine modifications or being offered something called coffee. "We must act decisively," announced Zex 427, bringing the chamber to silence. "If humans won't follow our regulations, they must face isolation. We will cut them off from all council space until they learn to follow proper procedures." The vote was unanimous. The council would show humans the proper way of doing things. As the session ended, no one noticed the small smile on the face of the Arthaxian observer, whose species had been waiting 4,000 years for someone to challenge the council's rigid ways. The message was sent to Earth: comply or face isolation. The response came back almost immediately, in the form of a short video. It showed humans teaching their children about the ancient explorers who had sailed Earth's oceans, venturing into the unknown. The final frame displayed a simple message: "We've been isolated before. It just gives us more reason to explore." The Galactic Council had no protocol for handling that kind of response. Administrator Yacht's morning had started badly and was getting worse by the minute. His desk was covered with reports of human assistance across council space, each one representing another violation of carefully crafted regulations. 3 more this morning, his assistant reported, adding to the pile. A human merchant ship helped repair a Zentari colony's air systems. A medical team treated sick Moravians without permits. And, oh dear, they're teaching others how to modify council-approved technology. Yacht's color patches shifted to a stressed purple. He picked up the first report, reading about the Zentari incident. The colony's atmospheric processors had failed, a situation that should have triggered standard evacuation protocols. Instead, a passing human freighter, the Star Wanderer, had stopped to help. They used parts from their own ship, Yacht exclaimed, his voice rising with each word. No safety certifications, no engineering approval, not even a repair permit. The report included images of the human crew working alongside Zentari engineers, showing them how to bypass damaged systems and create what they called temporary fixes. Most shocking was the notation at the bottom. The repairs had worked better than the original systems. The medical report was equally disturbing. A Moravian outpost had faced a viral outbreak, and council protocols required a 60-day quarantine period while proper treatment was developed. The humans, arriving in a small medical ship called Hope's Answer, had simply landed and started treating patients. They used experimental procedures, Yacht muttered, reading further. Created a cure in 3 days using something called adaptive response protocols. That's not in any approved medical manual. The worst part, not a single patient had been lost. In the council's main monitoring station, technicians watched with growing concern as humans shared their knowledge freely. A visiting human engineer had shown a Drachnid maintenance crew how to increase their engine efficiency by 23%. A human chef was teaching Arthaxians new ways to prepare food, completely ignoring traditional dietary regulations. They're spreading chaos, declared senior monitor Clicks, watching the screens. Look at this. A human showed a Zentari kid how to make something called a treehouse without filing a single construction permit. The regulatory committee called an emergency session. Representatives from 30 major species gathered to discuss the growing crisis. The chamber was filled with holograms showing various human innovations, spreading across council space. It's not just the unauthorized helping, explained Committee Chair Van Nine. They're teaching others to think differently, to question established procedures. Yesterday, a Drachnid engineer asked why we need 17 approval forms to change a power coupling. The room erupted in shocked whispers. Questioning procedures was unheard of. We must act, declared a Moravian representative, her crystalline form flickering with anxiety. But the humans' methods are showing results. That viral cure they created, our scientists analyzed it. It's brilliant. Chair Ven 9 raised all 4 hands for silence. Results are not the point. Order is the point. Structure, proper procedures. Without these, we have progress, suggested a young Arthaxian observer, earning several disapproving looks. Meanwhile, across council space, more species were seeking human contact. Trade ships deliberately adjusted their routes to accidentally encounter human vessels. Students were requesting transfers to human learning centers, fascinated by their practical teaching methods. The committee's final report was clear. Humans weren't just breaking regulations. They were making others question why the regulations existed in the first place. And that, concluded the report, was the biggest problem of all. In the Great Chamber's archive, an ancient saying flickered on a dusty screen. Change is the only constant. For the first time in millennia, the Council was beginning to understand what that truly meant. The Council's quarantine fleet formed a perfect blockade line, their silver-gold ships gleaming in the light of a distant sun. Admiral Xen 12 stood proudly on the bridge of his flagship, certain that this display of power would finally make the humans understand the importance of following proper procedures. All ships in position, reported his second-in-command. Nothing can pass without our. Sir, human transport on sensors. Admiral Xen 12's pride turned to confusion as he watched a small human cargo ship approach. Instead of stopping at the blockade, it sent a cheerful message. Good morning. We're delivering ice cream to the Moravian colonies, Anyone want some while we're passing through? They can't just, spluttered the admiral. But the human ship was already moving between two council vessels, its crew waving at the enforcement officers through view screens. Back in the council chamber, reports were getting worse. The quarantine wasn't just failing, it was backfiring. Species from all over council space were actively looking for human contact. Trade with Earth ships had increased by 300%, despite all sanctions. They're offering better prices, muttered a Zentari trade official, and faster delivery times, and their products actually work better than standard issue ones. But the real crisis began with a distress call from deep space. A Drachnid colony ship, carrying 10,000 settlers, suffered a catastrophic engine failure. According to Council safety protocols, the ship was too dangerous to approach. The standard procedure was clear: send condolences to the families and mark it as a tragic loss. Then a human mining vessel, the Deep Digger, picked up the distress signal. The Galaxy watched through the ship's broadcasts as Captain Sarah Martinez and her crew did the impossible. They matched speed with the failing colony ship, despite all experts saying it couldn't be done. Those engines could explode any second, protested Council Safety Officer Kral 9, watching the feeds. The regulations clearly state. But the humans weren't checking regulations, they were busy saving lives. The videos spread across every communication channel. Human engineers in simple protective suits, walking across the colony ship's hull while emergency alarms blared. The Council's safety experts watched in horror as the humans ignored 40 different safety protocols in 5 minutes. "Look at them," gasped a Moravian observer. "They're using emergency patches that haven't been approved. They're rewiring systems by hand. They're succeeding," finished an Arthaxian elder quietly. The humans not only stabilized the colony ship's engines but improved them. When asked how they managed it, Captain Martinez shrugged and said, "We just figured it out as we went along. Sometimes, that's all you can do." The Council's Emergency Response Committee held a crisis meeting. The footage of the rescue was playing on repeat. Humans risking their lives, working in conditions the Council deemed unsurvivable, succeeding where regulations said failure was certain. "This changes everything," whispered High Counselor X427, watching the screens. "They're showing our people that our safety protocols might be too safe," suggested a young aide. The ripples spread quickly. Other species began questioning the Council's cautious approach to everything. If humans could achieve so much by simply trying, what else was possible? What other Council limitations were holding them back? In the Great Chamber's private meeting room, the highest-ranking Council members faced an uncomfortable truth. Their perfect system of rules and regulations had just been outperformed by what humans called winging it. And somewhere in human space, Captain Martinez and her crew were already onto their next adventure, completely unaware that their simple act of helping others had just changed galactic society forever. Cultural Officer Mira 6 stared at her morning reports with growing concern. Her job had always been simple: monitor and maintain proper cultural exchange protocols across Council space. But humans had changed everything. "Another request for what they call movie night," her assistant reported, adding to the growing pile. 3 more species asking to try pizza, and the Zentari youth are now wearing something called jeans. Mira 6's color spots shifted to a worried yellow as she examined the latest cultural trends. Human entertainment was spreading faster than Council regulations could contain it. Their stories, music, and games were appearing everywhere, shared freely without proper cultural impact studies. "Look at this," she exclaimed, pointing to a particular report. "The Drachnid colonies have started something called democratic elections. They're letting common citizens choose their leaders." The Council's Cultural Preservation Chamber was in constant session now. Representatives watched in alarm as more species began adopting human practices. Young Moravians were learning Earth dances. Arthaxian cooking shows were attempting human recipes. Even the usually traditional Zentari had begun celebrating something called weekends. But the biggest shock came from the history archives. "They're sharing everything," reported senior archivist Kelmine, his voice trembling. "Not just their achievements, but their failures too. All their mistakes, their wrong turns, their bad decisions. They're teaching it all." This went against every council principle of cultural presentation. For millennia, species had been required to share only their perfected cultural narratives, carefully edited to show their best aspects. Humans, however, freely admitted their past mistakes. Yesterday, a human teacher told students about something called the Great Depression. Kelmine continued. She explained how their economy failed and how they learned from it. The students, they asked questions. They wanted to know more. In a quiet corner of the council library, a young Drachnid student watched human historical records with fascination. "They made so many mistakes," she whispered to her friend, "but they kept trying. They never gave up." The council's emergency session that day was filled with worried faces. Species across the galaxy were beginning to question the practice of showing only success stories. They wanted to learn from failures too. "It's spreading to government systems," announced High Counselor Zex 427. 6 colonies have already switched to democratic models. 20 more are asking about human-style education systems. They're even adopting human expressions. As if to prove his point, a junior member responded with, "That's awesome," earning several disapproving looks. The council's attempts to control the spread of human culture had the opposite effect. When they banned human entertainment, underground viewing parties sprang up. When they restricted human food, secret restaurants appeared. The more they tried to contain human influence, the more interesting it became. "Perhaps," suggested a wise Arthaxian elder, "we should try to understand why their culture appeals to so many. They offer something we've forgotten: the freedom to be imperfect." In the Great Chamber's observation deck, Mira 6 watched the daily traffic of ships coming and going. A human vessel passed by, its crew probably sharing stories, songs, and ideas with anyone who would listen. For the first time in her career, she wondered if trying to control cultural exchange was like trying to control the stars themselves. Beautiful in theory, but impossible in practice. And somewhere in the galaxy, another group of young beings was discovering the human concept of rock and roll. And the council's perfect cultural harmony would never be the same again. Safety Inspector Lin 14 had never broken a rule in his 300 years of service. Today, he stood before the council's emergency committee, questioning everything he believed in. "The human colony should have been destroyed," he began, his voice shaking. "When the Category 5 solar storm hit, all our safety models showed zero chance of survival. But they..." He paused, struggling with the words. "They survived. They broke every safety rule we have, and they survived." The committee chamber was silent as they watched recordings from the colony. Humans had ignored evacuation orders when the storm approached. Instead, they had worked together, creating solutions that broke 143 different safety protocols. "They used mining shields as atmospheric deflectors," reported Technical Advisor Kex 3, checking her notes. "They reversed power grid polarity, a complete violation of Standard Power Regulation 7249. They even turned their entertainment systems into emergency communicators." High Counselor Zex 427 leaned forward in his chair. "But their methods worked. Better than our approved procedures," Lin 14 admitted. "They saved not just themselves, but 3 nearby research stations too." The council's philosophy chamber, unused for centuries, was reopened for emergency discussions. The questions being asked hadn't been considered in thousands of years. What if their careful regulations were actually holding species back? What if making mistakes was necessary for growth? "Look at human history," suggested Professor Jax of the Arthaxian Science Academy. "They learned to fly by crashing countless times. They reached space through explosions and failures. Each mistake taught them something new." The council's approach had always been different. They believed in preventing all possible failures through careful regulation. Species were given tested, safe technologies. They were protected from making mistakes. But at what cost? Asked a young Drachnid scholar. We haven't had a major scientific breakthrough in 300 years. We follow the rules so carefully that we never try anything new. In the Great Chamber, debates raged for days. The evidence was becoming clear. Human colonies faced with disasters often performed better than those following council protocols. They adapted, improvised, and learned from their failures. Perhaps, suggested Counselor Mira 6, we should study how humans handle failure instead of trying to prevent it entirely. The idea shocked many traditional council members, but others began to see wisdom in it. Humans had a saying that caught their attention. Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. A test case presented itself when a space station reported system failures. Instead of sending the usual repair team with standard protocols, they sent a mixed team, council engineers working alongside human specialists. The results were surprising. The human approach of try it and see what works combined with council technical knowledge proved more effective than either method alone. The station was fixed in half the usual time, using solutions nobody had tried before. We've been so focused on preventing failures, Lin 14 told the committee, that we forgot how to learn from them. Humans remember something we lost long ago. Sometimes you have to risk being wrong to find a better way to be right. In the council library, an ancient text was discovered, written before the age of strict regulation. It read, "Growth requires both the wisdom to avoid unnecessary risks and the courage to take necessary ones." The council faced its greatest question yet. Could they find a balance between their careful order and humanity's chaos? The answer would reshape galactic civilization, if they were brave enough to try. Commander Dak 7 of the Council Enforcement Fleet stood on his bridge, ready to make history. His task force of 20 ships approached the first human trading station, prepared to show these troublemakers the consequences of ignoring Council authority. All weapons secured, his tactical officer reported, ready to begin standard intimidation procedure. The human station, instead of showing fear, lit up with bright, colorful lights. A message flashed across its outer hull. "Welcome to the party. Free snacks in Docking Bay 3. They're throwing us a welcome party." Dak 7 stammered, watching as his mighty invasion force was met with cheerful music and floating balloons. Across council space, similar scenes played out. The enforcement fleet arrived at human outposts ready for resistance. Instead, they found celebrations. Human stations declared themselves officially captured before anyone could actually capture them, then insisted on giving tours to their conquerors. "Sir," reported a confused officer at another station, "they're asking what kind of cake we prefer for the victory celebration. They're baking it right now." In the Council's Strategic Command Center, reports piled up. None of them made sense. Human trading posts handed out conquest completion certificates to enforcement officers. Their stations played cheerful music when captured. Some even organized group photos with their captors. "This isn't how it's supposed to work," protested Strategic Director Ven 9, watching the chaos unfold. "They're supposed to resist, or surrender, or something normal." But humans, it seemed, had their own ideas about normal. When council ships surrounded a human mining colony, the miners organized an impromptu space picnic. They even taught the enforcement officers how to play something called frisbee in low gravity. The final straw came when images spread across the galaxy showing the proud council enforcement fleet covered in what humans called bumper stickers. The mighty warships now bore messages like, "Honk if you love peace," and "My other ship is a flying saucer." "We can't threaten them," realized Admiral Crowlate, watching another failed attempt at intimidation. "They just turned everything into a joke. How you fight an enemy that wants to be your friend." The Council's enforcement officers faced an unexpected crisis. They were starting to enjoy their missions. Many looked forward to visiting human stations, where they were greeted with kindness and treats instead of fear and resistance. Yesterday, reported a junior officer, trying not to smile, a human taught me something called high five. Now my whole crew is doing it. In a secret meeting, the council's hardliners faced an uncomfortable truth. Their attempt to force humans to comply had backfired completely. Not only had they failed to intimidate the humans, but their own officers were returning with new ideas, new foods to try, and strange human sayings. "We launched this operation to show our strength," groaned Commander Dax 7, looking at his fleet's newest report. "Instead, we're trending on human social media as the most huggable invasion force ever." The Council's reputation for stern authority would never recover. How could anyone take them seriously after seeing their mighty warships decorated with smiley faces and peace symbols? In the end, it was a young Zentari officer who best summed up the situation. "Maybe the humans are teaching us something important, that sometimes the best way to win isn't to fight at all, but to make friends instead." And somewhere in human space, a station manager was already planning next week's Invasion Appreciation Day party, complete with games, music, and of course, plenty of snacks. The Great Chamber of the Galactic Council, once a symbol of perfect order, now echoed with voices of change. Species that had followed protocols without question for thousands of years were starting to ask, why? "The protocols are not working anymore," announced Representative Cora of the Drachnid Systems, her voice firm. "My people have learned more in 1 year of working with humans than in the previous century of following standard procedures." The chamber erupted in a mix of agreement and protest. On the massive display screens, evidence of change flickered across the galaxy. Council member species were adopting human approaches to problem-solving, often with remarkable results. "Look at what happened in the Moravian crisis last week," said technical advisor Junate, bringing up the recordings. A natural disaster had struck a Moravian colony, a massive earthquake that should have taken weeks to address under council protocols. The recordings showed what actually happened. Human emergency teams arrived first, quickly joined by Drachnid engineers and Zentari medical units. Instead of following the standard 47-step disaster response procedure, they created solutions on the spot. "They didn't even file the proper paperwork," protested Senior Administrator Yacht, his color patches flashing with distress. "No," agreed Junate, "but they saved everyone in the colony. The humans call it organized chaos, and it works." The evidence was impossible to ignore. The screens showed rescue teams from different species working together, sharing ideas, trying new approaches. When one solution failed, they quickly tried another. There was no waiting for approval, no filing of forms, just quick, effective action. "But the protocols have kept us safe for 50,000 years, argued Counselor Vex 12, his voice heavy with tradition. "They represent the collected wisdom of centuries." A young Arthaxian observer stepped forward, her eyes bright with new ideas. "Perhaps it's time for new wisdom. The humans showed us something important, that rules should help us act, not prevent us from acting." The council watched more recordings from recent events. In each case, teams using human-style flexible response systems had handled crises faster and more effectively than those following standard protocols. "They taught us to trust our judgment," said a Zentari emergency worker in one recording. "To think for ourselves instead of just following procedures." The change was spreading beyond emergency response. Council species were beginning to question old ways of doing everything. Young ones especially were eager to try new approaches, to learn from mistakes rather than avoid all risk. "Our protocols were meant to protect," said High Counselor Zex 427, rising slowly from his chair. "But protection should not mean preventing growth." In a quiet corner of the chamber, Ambassador Sarah Chen from Earth watched with a small smile. She had known this moment would come, when the Council realized that true progress required both wisdom and flexibility. The final evidence came from a comparison study. 2 colonies facing similar challenges. One following Council protocols took 6 months to solve their problems. The other, using human-inspired flexible methods, found solutions in 2 weeks. Perhaps, suggested Counselor Mira 6, it's time for us to learn from our newest members instead of trying to make them learn from us. The vote that followed was unlike any in council history. For the first time, they chose to change not because of careful planning, but because of proven results. The old protocols would be reviewed, updated, and in many cases, completely rewritten. As the session ended, a message appeared on the chamber's main screen. It came from a group of young beings from different species who had been working with humans. The future belongs to those who are brave enough to create it. The Galactic Council was finally ready to be brave. The Great Chamber looked different now. Gone were the rigid rows of seats arranged by species rank. Instead, circular discussion areas encouraged open conversation between all members. On the walls, new screens showed real-time collaboration between different species across the galaxy. "Welcome to the first session of the Galactic Cooperative," announced High Counselor Zex 427, his voice carrying a warmth that would have been considered inappropriate in the old council. "Today, we begin a new chapter in galactic history." The gathered representatives looked different too. Some wore traditional council robes, others chose casual human-style clothing, and many mixed both styles. It was a small change that showed a bigger truth. Everyone was free to choose their own way now. "Our first order of business," continued Zex 427, "is to officially invite the humans to join as founding members of the cooperative." Ambassador Sarah Chen stood up, smiling that same friendly smile that had once shocked the old council. "We would be honored," she said, "but first, we have a few suggestions." A ripple of laughter spread through the chamber. Of course the humans had suggestions. They always did. "The old council tried to prevent all mistakes," Sarah explained. "The new cooperative should help members learn from their mistakes instead. We propose a galaxy-wide exchange program." The screens lit up with her proposal. Young beings from every species would have the chance to live with and learn from other cultures. Not just their successes, but their failures too. "Think about it," she continued. "Zentari engineering students learning human creativity. Human medical students learning Moravian healing techniques. Everyone sharing not just what worked, but what didn't work and why." The chamber buzzed with excitement. This was exactly the kind of innovation the new cooperative was created for. "But what about safety?" asked a former council hardliner. "Won't this lead to more accidents?" A young Drachnid scientist stepped forward. "I studied at a human university last year," she said. "Yes, we made mistakes, but we learned so much more from those mistakes than from any safety manual." The evidence supported her words. The screens showed data from recent cooperation between species. Mixed teams had solved problems faster than any single species working alone. They made more mistakes, but they also found more solutions. "The old council thought perfect order was the goal," said Counselor Mira 6. "Now we understand that growth comes from balance, between order and chaos, between caution and courage, between experience and innovation." The vote was unanimous. The exchange program would begin immediately. But then something unexpected happened. Species started volunteering to host students right there in the chamber. The Zentari Engineering Academy would be honored to host human students, announced their representative. "Though we may need to update our safety protocols," he added with a smile. "And the Earth Space Academy would love to welcome students from all species," Sarah responded. "Though we may need to add some safety protocols," she admitted, making everyone laugh. As the session ended, High Counselor Zex 427 looked around the chamber with pride. The screens showed ships from different species working together, stations hosting mixed crews, and young beings everywhere eager to learn from each other. "The galaxy has changed," he said softly, "and for the first time in 50,000 years, we don't know exactly what will happen next." "Isn't it wonderful?" replied Ambassador Chen with a bright smile. And throughout the galaxy, beings of all species looked up at the stars and saw not a regulated, ordered space, but an endless frontier of possibilities, just waiting to be explored together.